The night the storms rolled over Hawthorne Estate was the night billionaire Adrian Hawthorne realized something inside his perfect, silent mansion was terribly wrong, though he couldn't yet explain why the feeling pressed so heavily on his chest. His twins, Ava and Adenborn, with a rare neurological condition that kept them unable to speak and limited their movements, had always been the fragile center of his world, the only soft spot in a man otherwise hardened by wealth, power, and endless negotiations. Yet for the past few weeks Adrian had felt an unshakable tension building around them, something he first dismissed as exhaustion until small, unsettling details began stacking up in ways that gnawed at his gut. A teddy bear moved from its usual place on the sofa, soft humming heard through the intercom, even though no music played in the children's room. Once, he found a blanket tucked so perfectly around Aiden that it resembled the careful nestling his late wife used to do, and the thought had made him freeze because no nanny on staff had that habit. But it was the cleaner Maya Daniels, a quiet, hardworking woman who moved through the mansion with gentle footsteps that Adrian kept thinking about, even though he had no reason to suspect her other than the simple fact that she was often the only one present at strange hours. It wasn't suspicion in a sinister way. Rather, it was the unsettling mystery of what he didn't know. So he installed new cameras, tiny, hidden, all linked to his private office, not to trap anyone, he told himself, but to restore peace to a mind spiraling in worry. And when he pressed the record button that first stormy night, he had no idea the footage would soon unravel a truth so unexpected and deeply human that it would shake the core of his life. The evening had been long and suffocating with work emails and business negotiations when Adrian finally leaned back in his chair, loosening the tension in his spine. But just as he took a breath, a notification blinked across his surveillance screen. Motion detected children's wing? His fingers trembled slightly as he clicked into the feed. The hallway lights flickered from the storm, shadows stretching like long fingers across the polished floors, and into the frame stepped Maya, wearing her dark uniform and holding a small cloth in her hand. Moving with the quiet grace she always carried, Adrian leaned closer, expecting her to simply clean as part of her late shift. But instead, she paused outside the twins' room, closed her eyes, and exhaled as though steadying herself for something emotional. She whispered something he couldn't hear through the mic, then slowly pushed the door open. Adrian's pulse sped. Ava and Aiden lay awake in their twin beds, staring at the ceiling as they often did on stormy nights, their bodies stiffened by the claps of thunder. But Maya didn't turn on the lights or rush toward them the way the nurses usually did. Instead, she approached with a tenderness so soft it caught even Adrian by surprise. She knelt between their beds, placed a hand gently on each child, and began humming a melody so delicate and familiar that Adrian's breath caught in his throat because it was his wife's lullaby, the one only he and the children had ever known, the one he hadn't heard since the night she died. He felt the blood drain from his face. How did she know it? How long had she known it? Why was she singing it now? The camera caught every detail, the way the twins' rigid bodies relaxed, the way their eyes fluttered as though recognizing the melody from some deep memory, the way Maya looked at them not with pity or obligation but with a fierce, maternal protectiveness that made Adrian's chest tighten with something he didn't understand. For a moment he felt anger rising, mixed with confusion, because no employee should be so intimately involved without permission. Yet something about the scene was so undeniably gentle that he couldn't pull his eyes away. The storm outside grew louder, lightning flashing across the windows, and the children whimpered at each thunderclap. But Maya reacted instantly, placing herself between them, whispering words of comfort, brushing their hair with slow, rhythmic strokes as if calming fragile birds. She told them they were safe, that storms couldn't hurt them, that she was there. Adrian couldn't remember the last time anyone besides him had spoken to them with such raw empathy. He hadn't hired her for childcare, she was just a cleaner, someone who wiped surfaces and mopped floors, and yet here she was offering something no amount of money had ever been able to buy: human warmth. Minutes passed, then nearly half an hour, and Maya continued her gentle vigil, unaware of the camera capturing every second. At one point she lifted Aiden's hand, guiding his stiff fingers around a soft stressed ball, encouraging him to squeeze it, celebrating his tiniest movement with a quiet, heartfelt, "That's it, baby, you're doing so well." And Adrian felt something crack inside him because even he, their father, had never spoken to them with that tone of effortless affection. When Ava began to cry, a silent, shaken cry that she often couldn't express in sound, Maya reacted with a speed that suggested she had memorized every nuance of the child's needs. She pulled a warm cloth from her pocket, wiped Ava's tears, kissed the top of her head, and held her until the tremors subsided. Adrian sat frozen, staring at the screen, unable to breathe properly, torn between the instinct to march down the hall and demand answers, and the overwhelming realization that this woman, this quiet cleaner he barely knew outside payroll signatures, had become something of an anchor to his children in ways he had failed to notice. Then something happened that made the hairs on his arms stand straight. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out a small worn journal. She flipped to a page marked with a ribbon and began reading softly, showing the twins a hand-drawn picture. Adrian zoomed the camera in, heart pounding. It was a sketch of two children in wheelchairs, smiling under a tree. surrounded by flowers, and a woman kneeling beside them with her arms wrapped around both. It was beautifully drawn, filled with color and warmth, and at the top of the page it read, "My promise, you will never feel alone." Adrian blinked in shock. Why was his cleaner drawing pictures of his children? Why was she writing promises to them? Why did the image feel so heartbreakingly tender? He should have felt violated. He should have been furious. But instead, an ache he hadn't identified before spread through his chest. Because for the first time since his wife's death, someone was caring for his twins not because they were wealthy, not because they were a billionaire's children, but because they were human beings, deserving love. Thunder cracked again, and Maya flinched, then whispered, "I know it's scary. I used to be scared too. My brother was like you, quiet, gentle, always watching the world with eyes full of stories he couldn't say. Storms terrified him." She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I promised him I'd always stay close. And now I'll stay close to you too." Adrian froze, stunned by the unexpected confession. A sibling, a past, a grief she carried silently. Something inside him shifted, but before he could fully process, a much darker detail caught his attention, something he almost missed at first. Behind Maya, just barely visible near the window, the curtain moved, not from wind, from something or someone outside. Adrian leaned forward, his pulse hammering, eyes locked on the shadowy movement. Maya didn't notice. She was still focused on calming the twins. The camera switched angles automatically, giving Adrian a clearer view, and the blood in his veins ran cold. A figure stood near the edge of the window, a silhouette watching from outside, tall, unmoving, far too close to be accidental. Adrian's stomach flipped. This was not a storm trick. This was a person staring directly into his children's room. The realization hit him. Like a knife to the ribs. Someone had been watching his twins. Someone had been near his home. Someone had been close enough to know exactly when Maya comforted them, and if not for the camera, he would never have known. His fear exploded into action as he shot up from his desk, heart thundering louder than the storm, sprinting toward the hallway with a feeling that everything he thought he knew about security, safety and trust was about to be shattered. And as he ran, one final thought clawed at him. If Maya had not been with the twins at that exact moment, what would that shadowed figure have tried to do? Adrian's footsteps echoed through the silent halls as he sprinted toward the children's wing, his breath sharp and uneven, adrenaline pumping so violently through his veins that he barely felt the cold marble beneath his feet. The storm battered the mansion from all sides, lightning slicing through the sky and illuminating the corridors in quick flashes, but all he could think about was the shadow, the figure at the window, the stranger who had been watching his disabled twins with a stillness far too deliberate to be innocent. He rounded the final corner so fast, he nearly slipped. But when he burst into the children's room, Maya gasped and jumped to her feet, instinctively shielding Ava and Aiden with her body, as though she had known danger long before he arrived. Adrian rushed to the window, yanking the curtains aside, scanning the darkness beyond the glass. But the figure was gone. Only rain hammered the pane now, sliding in streaks down the cold surface. He cursed under his breath, fists clenched. He had been seconds too late. Maya's voice trembled behind him as she asked what was happening, but Adrian didn't answer immediately. He was trying to breathe, trying to understand the pounding in his chest that was equal parts fear, fury, and a dawning realization that his mansion, his fortress, was no longer safe. When he finally turned toward Maya, her expression was confused, worried, and deeply protective, a stance he had rarely seen from any employee. She held the twins close, her arms wrapped around them like a shield, and the sight cut through him more sharply than he expected. He told her about the figure at the window, watching them, and the shock in her eyes wasn't the kind that hides guilt, it was the kind that recognizes danger. She stepped toward the window, her face tightening with unmistakable fear. "You're sure?" she whispered, and Adrian nodded, still trying to regulate his breathing. For a moment the room was silent, except for the storm, Ava's soft whimpers, and the faint mechanical hum of the ventilator that sometimes helped Aiden breathe on difficult days. Maya knelt beside the children again, whispering comfort, and Adrian's chest tightened at the tenderness in her voice, the kind that seemed stitched into her bones. A surge of conflicting thoughts raced through his mind. Why did she care so deeply? Why did she sing his wife's lullaby? Why did she draw promises in a journal for children who weren't hers? How did she know exactly how to soothe them? He wanted answers. He deserved answers. But right now, the only priority was keeping the twins safe. He picked up his phone and called his head of security, ordering him to lock down the entire estate and check the grounds. Within minutes, guards with flashlights were sweeping the perimeter. Maya watched the window, her jaw clenched. Adrian could see she was trying to stay calm for the twins, but something haunted her expressions, something that made him feel she wasn't as surprised by danger as someone should be, as though she had lived with it before. When the security team reported no signs of intruders, only footprints washed half-faded by the rain, Adrian felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Someone had definitely been there. Someone who knew the storm would hide them. Someone who knew where the children slept. Someone who had been bold enough to walk right up to the window of a billionaire's estate. He dismissed the guards after instructing them to remain on high alert. then escorted Maya to the living room with the twins, not wanting any of them left alone. She held Ava on her lap and kept one hand resting protectively on Aiden's arm. And for the first time, Adrian saw a fragility in her eyes that didn't match the serene strength she had shown earlier. Something inside him softened, but suspicion still gnawed at him. He needed to know more. As the storm raged outside, he finally asked her how she knew his wife's lullaby. The question hung in the air like a heavy stone. Maya froze. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She swallowed hard. "I shouldn't have. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. Adrian's suspicion sharpened, but before he could press further, Maya began speaking slowly, painfully, like each word scraped her throat on the way out. She explained that years ago, before taking the cleaning job, she had worked at a rehabilitation center in the city, caring for children with similar conditions to Ava and Aiden. She had loved those kids deeply, too deeply, some said, because when budget cuts forced the center to close, she kept visiting some of them long after losing her job. She talked about a boy named Samuel, who couldn't speak but communicated with his eyes just like Aiden. She talked about reading to him, drawing for him, comforting him during storms because thunder terrified him, and then her voice faltered. Adrian realized there was more, something painful, but she seemed unable to say it. He sat down across from her, watching her carefully, trying to understand her. She wasn't lying. He felt that instinctively, but there was something still hidden beneath the surface. Something that connected her to his children in ways he didn't yet understand. Ava reached up and touched Maya's face. A small gesture, but it made Maya break just for a moment. Her eyes filling with tears, she tried to blink away. Adrian had never seen his daughter respond to anyone so willingly. He felt his suspicion melting into a different kind of tension now, one rooted in confusion and an unexpected trust forming against his will. Before he could ask more, a loud crash echoed from outside, sharp enough that all three adults flinched. Adrian rushed to the window again. Security lights flashed on automatically, illuminating the driveway. A tree branch had fallen, but that wasn't what made his blood run cold. A car sat partially hidden behind the hedges. A car he didn't recognize. A car that wasn't there earlier. Adrian grabbed his phone again, calling security, but they were already running toward the vehicle. Maya stood up, trembling, holding the twins close again. Her fear wasn't subtle, it was raw, unfiltered, the kind that comes from knowing danger intimately. The guards approached the car slowly, weapons drawn. Adrian watched through the window, heart hammering, but before they could reach the driver's door, the headlights flickered on, and the engine roared to life. The car peeled out of the driveway, skidding on wet pavement, vanishing into the darkness before the security gate could fully close. Adrian cursed violently. Someone had been watching, someone bold enough to come close and patient enough to wait. He turned back toward Maya, noticing she looked pale, shaken, like she recognized the pattern of danger rather than the specific person. He asked her directly if she knew who might be doing this. She hesitated, gripping Ava tighter. Her silence was answer enough. She knew something. When pressed, she finally whispered, I think someone from the center has been following me." Her voice trembled as she explained that after the rehab center closed, she had spoken out publicly about mistreatment by one of the administrators, a man named Dr. Rylan Creed. He was charismatic, wealthy, untouchable, and when she exposed him, he lost everything: his position, his reputation, his funding. He blamed her, he harassed her, he stalked her. She filed reports that went nowhere because he was too influential, and eventually, he disappeared from the public eye altogether, leaving her with years of fear. She had moved 3 times trying to escape him. Each time, he found her again. Adrian listened in stunned silence. Suddenly, things clicked into place. Her cautious movements, her emotional walls, her deep connection to kids like Ava and Aiden, her instinctive protectiveness during storms. She hadn't been drawn to his children out of obsession or inappropriate attachments. She had been drawn out of trauma, empathy, and love forged in the fires of a childhood facility where she learned how deeply neglected kids could be. But one detail hit Adrian the hardest. If Dr. Creed had found her again, then he had also found the twins. A surge of fury coursed through him, so violently that he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. No one threatened his children. No one. Maya apologized in a shaking voice, blaming herself for bringing danger into the house. But Adrian silenced her sharply, not out of anger toward her, but because her apology was wrong. She wasn't the threat. She was the only reason his twins hadn't been alone when danger approached. He told her she wasn't going anywhere. Not tonight. Not while someone like Creed was lurking near the mansion. For once, Maya didn't argue. The storm began to ease, the thunder rumbling farther away, but the tension inside the mansion only grew heavier. Adrian paced the floor, replaying every moment from the footage. Every detail Maya revealed, every possible motive Creed might have for targeting not just her but his disabled children. Wealth, revenge, leverage, something darker. He didn't know yet. And then, as Adrian sat at his surveillance desk again, exhausted but alert, his screen flashed once more. Motion detected: basement hallway. His blood turned to ice. No one should be in the basement. No one. He clicked the camera, feet on. His heart almost stopped. A tall figure in a coat moved silently through the darkness of the lower hall, their face hidden, their steps slow and deliberate. They weren't breaking in, they were already inside. The intruder had been in the house the entire time, and the twins' fragile twins were upstairs with Maya, completely unaware of the danger rising from below. Everything in Adrian's body snapped into action. He grabbed the nearest weapon, a heavy metal lamp, and sprinted toward the stairs with a fury he hadn't felt since the night he lost his wife. As he ran, one thought fueled every step. Whoever was in his house was not leaving without consequences. Adrian tore down the staircase like a man possessed, the lamp gripped so tightly in his hand that his knuckles burned white. Every instinct he had, every protective bone in his body, ignited with a single purpose: protect the twins. The basement hallway was long, dim, and carved with shadows that flickered under the weak emergency lights triggered by the storm. Rainwater dripped from a leak somewhere in the ceiling, the rhythmic tapping echoing through the cold concrete space. As Adrian crept forward, breath shaking, he could hear faint, deliberate footsteps somewhere ahead, confident, as though the intruder knew exactly where he was going and had no fear of being caught. Adrian flattened himself against the wall, inching closer to the corner that separated him from the darkened storage corridor where the figure had disappeared. But then, everything went silent. No footsteps, no movement. Just the storm outside and the thud of Adrian's own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He risked a glance around the corner, expecting to see an empty hall. Instead, he froze. The intruder stood at the far end of the corridor, motionless, as if waiting. A tall, broad figure wearing a long charcoal coat, hood soaked with rain, face hidden behind a mask of shadow. The man tilted his head slightly as though studying Adrian. No weapon, no words. Just a stare so cold and calculated it felt like standing inches from an open freezer door. Adrian swallowed his fear and raised the lamp, stepping forward. "Who are you?" Adrian shouted, his voice echoing too loudly in the cramped space. "What do you want?" Still, the figure didn't move. Instead, he slowly lifted one hand and pointed upward, the direction of the children's room. Adrian's stomach twisted, dread clawing through him. And then, without warning, the intruder lunged forward, sprinting toward him with terrifying speed. Adrian tried to swing the lamp, but the metal slipped from his sweat-soaked palm. The intruder grabbed his shoulder, shoving him violently against the wall, hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. Adrian staggered, struggling to get up, but the man didn't attack again. He simply stepped backward, stared at Adrian for one final chilling moment, then turned and bolted toward the stairs. Adrian's panic erupted. He scrambled to his feet and chased after him, heart threatening to tear out of his chest. The intruder sprinted up the steps two at a time, heading straight for the upper levels. Adrian shouted Maya's name, but thunder swallowed his voice. The moment he reached the main floor, he saw the lights flickering, shadows dancing wildly along the corridor walls. Maya was standing near the kitchen with the twins beside her, her arms wrapped around them protectively, her breathing fast and panicked. She had heard the shouting, she had sensed the danger. "Where is he?" she cried. Adrian didn't have time to answer. A loud crash sounded from the living room, glass shattering. The intruder had smashed through the side window and sprinted into the storm, vanishing into the darkness just as security burst inside. Chaos erupted, instantly guards running out into the rain, alarms blaring, lights flashing. Adrian grabbed Maya and the twins, pulling them close, grounding himself in the one thing he knew: they were safe, for now. But the look in Maya's eyes told him everything he feared. She knew who the intruder was, or at least, she had a very good idea. When security confirmed minutes later that the man had fled the property, Adrian ushered Maya and the twins into his private officer room, safer than a panic room. Thanks to its reinforced steel door and bulletproof windows, he gently placed the twins on the couch, wrapped in blankets, comforted by Maya's warm touch. Then he turned to her. His voice was low, firm. "Tell me everything." Maya sat down slowly, visibly exhausted, her hands shaking. For a long moment she stared at the floor, gathering herself, before finally speaking. Her voice trembled. Not from fear anymore, but from the weight of truth. She explained that Dr. Kreda, man who had run the rehab center, hadn't just mistreated children. He had been secretly altering their medical files, manipulating their diagnoses, and funneling millions of dollars in fraudulent insurance claims. Maya had discovered it accidentally, and when she confronted him, he threatened her. But she documented everything: photos, notes, signatures, and handed the evidence to a journalist. When the story broke, Creed's empire collapsed. He lost everything, and he blamed her. He took revenge on every whistleblower except one, Maya. She was the last on his list. But what Adrian didn't know was that Maya had been receiving threats for months, each one more disturbing than the last. She didn't tell anyone because she didn't want to burden others with her fear. She thought taking a cleaning job in a private estate would keep her hidden. She didn't know that Creed had already found her months earlier. She only realized he had tracked her again when she saw a familiar black car parked near the bus stop 2 weeks ago. Adrian listened in stunned silence, fury boiling under his skin like lava. This man, this monster, had been inside his home. He had stood feet away from his defenseless children. He had threatened a woman who had done nothing but love and protect. Adrian felt sick. He felt useless. But most of all, He felt angry, ferociously angry. Security returned with urgent updates. Tire tracks matched the car that fled earlier. A nearby traffic camera caught a blurry image of the driver enough to confirm it was indeed Dr. Creed. Adrian knew this wouldn't end with a simple chase. Creed was obsessed, unhinged, and he wasn't finished. That night, Adrian made a decision. He was done reacting. He was done hiding behind cameras and guards. He was going to protect his family and Maya no matter what it took. He gathered his top security officers, ordered the mansion fortified, and set up a command center inside his office. He installed new cameras, new alarms, and authorized patrols around the clock. Maya offered to leave to keep the family safe, but Adrian refused outright. "You're staying," he said firmly. "My children trust you. They feel safe with you, and I trust you too." The words came out before he could filter them, but he didn't regret them. Maya stared at him, stunned, her eyes shining not with fear, this time but with an emotion Adrian hadn't seen in her before. Gratitude. For the next 2 days, the mansion remained under lockdown. Police became involved. Investigations began. Adrian never left his children's side, and Maya stayed close, always gentle, always alert, always watching the shadows. But on the third night, something happened that changed everything. A faint tapping came from the front gates, slow, rhythmic, metallic. Security screens lit up automatically in Adrian's office. He froze. Maya stiffened beside him. On the grainy night vision feed, they saw a dark figure standing at the gate. Dr. Creed, soaked from rain, still waiting. Security moved in instantly. But Creed didn't run this time. He raised his hands slowly, almost mockingly, and smiled up at the camera. Adrian's blood thundered. He knew that smile. It wasn't the smile of a man surrendering. It was the smile of a man who had already planned the next step. Within seconds, 6 police cars swarmed the entrance. Officers tackled Creed to the ground. He didn't resist. He didn't fight. He just stared into the camera with a look that burned through Adrian's soul. A smile that whispered, "This isn't over," but it was. Because Maya's testimony and the evidence she had saved were enough to lock Creed away for decades. Because the authorities finally had what they needed to dismantle everything he had hidden. Because Adrian, with his influence and power, ensured no one in the system could cover for Creed ever again. The mansion slowly returned to life. Storms passed. Security relaxed. The twins smiled more often, reaching for Maya with trust that warmed Adrian's heart in ways he hadn't expected. Weeks later, Adrian stood in the children's room watching Maya read to Ava and Aiden, her voice calm and soothing, her journal open beside her. He felt something settle inside him, not fear, not suspicion, but peace. True peace. The kind he hadn't felt since his wife died. He realized then that Maya had saved them not just during the night of the storm, but long before that. She had given the twins something priceless: connection, love, comfort, and she had given Adrian something he thought he would never have again: someone to trust. As the twins drifted to sleep, Maya stood and whispered goodnight, turning to leave quietly. Adrian stepped into the doorway, blocking her path for a moment. "Thank you," he said softly, sincerely. "For everything?" Maya smiled, small, warm, genuine. "You would have done the same," she whispered, and maybe she was right. But Adrian knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never let anyone hurt her or the twins again. Not as long as he lived. Outside, the sky cleared for the first time in weeks, stars spreading across the night like scattered diamonds. Inside the mansion, the world felt safe again finally. Completely safe. And somewhere deep in Adrian's heart, a new chapter had quietly begun.